History may remember the 2010s as one of the Indianapolis 500's greatest decades. For the first time since the 1980s, a sport that had been torn apart by civil war was now pulling in the same direction with a consistent cast of characters. This continuity led to one of the most competitive and exciting decades the greatest spectacle in racing has ever seen. Take a look with us as we go through the highlights and lowlights of the decade. This is Indy 500, the 2010s. The decade began with revisions to the Indy 500 qualifying format, moving away from the traditional 2 weekends of time trials to just one. The way the pole position would be determined was also changed with the introduction of the Fast 9 shootout, which would set aside the final hour and a half of pole day time trials to the fastest 9 cars, which would have unlimited attempts to go for the pole. 3-time winner Helio Castroneves took the pole at a 4-lap average of just under 228 miles an hour. The real story in qualifying was Bump Day, which saw a bizarre circumstance where the already qualified cars of Paul Tracy and Jay Howard withdrew their times in an attempt to qualify faster, but both ended up going slower and missed the show. To add to the insanity, this sequence of events promoted the small startup team of Brian Herta Autosport back into the field of 33. But driver Sebastian Saavedra wasn't at the track to celebrate, as he was in the hospital after suffering an accident in practice earlier that day in a vain attempt to find more speed to bump his way back into the field. One of the most incredible qualifying moments in Indy 500 history. The race itself was absolutely dominated by third-place starter and 2007 winner Dario Franchitti. The Scotsman led 155 of the 200 laps, but a late race crash by Bump Day Cinderella Saavedra caused the race to become a fuel economy run in the final stint. Several different drivers led the race in the final laps, including Mike Conway, Justin Wilson, and Helio Castroneves, but none could make it on fuel. The fuel mileage lottery landed back on Dario Franchitti, who was hotly pursued by Dan Wheldon as the white flag came out. The race ended under the yellow flag after a horrific crash involving Mike Conway and Ryan Hunter-Reay. Hunter-Reay had run out of fuel going into turn 3, and Mike Conway had nowhere to go but over the top of Hunter-Reay's right rear tire and into the catch fence. Conway was lucky to escape with a broken left leg and a compression fracture of one of his thoracic vertebrae, and while he was out for the rest of the season, he returned to drive the next year. Franchitti had enough fuel left in his tank to thread his way through the debris field and take his second Indianapolis 500 win. Wheldon finished second, and Marco Andretti finished third. The 2011 Indianapolis 500 was a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911, won by Ray Haroon in the world-famous Marmon Wasp. Something else to celebrate was a robust entry list of over 40 cars going for the 33 spots in the field. This race was unique from the other Indianapolis 500s as it was the only one where a NASCAR-style double-file restart procedure was implemented. The added excitement was popular with the fans, but not so much for the drivers or team owners, and was dropped the following year. Alex Tagliani for Sam Schmidt Motorsports scored a surprising pole position at just over 227 miles per hour, but the dramatics in qualifying centered around the struggles of the Andretti Autosport team. Only John Andretti was able to safely qualify in the field, while Danica Patrick and Marco Andretti both had to bump their way into the 33-car field, the latter at the expense of his own teammate Ryan Hunter-Reay. Other big names to miss the show were Mike Conway, Scott Speed, and Patrick Carpentier. The drama didn't end at the 6 o'clock gun, as Michael Andretti and sponsors DHL and Sundrop made a controversial deal with AJ Foyt Racing to buy the 19th place car from the qualified driver Bruno Junqueira and start 33rd with Hunter-Reay on race day. The race itself played out much like the previous year, with the Target Chip Ganassi team of the defending winner Dario Franchitti and the 2008 winner Scott Dixon trading the lead for a total of 124 laps, but they were closely pursued throughout the race by the Sam Schmidt team of Alex Tagliani and Townsend Bell, as well as the 2005 winner Dan Wheldon for Brian Herta Autosport. Things fell apart for the Schmidt team late in the race, as Tagliani smacked the turn 4 wall, attempting to pass J.R. Hildebrand on the outside. And on the subsequent restart, Bell tangled with Ryan Briscoe in turn 1. That caution kicked off the fuel mileage lottery, similar to what we had seen in 2010. Danica Patrick cycled to the front with 20 laps to go, but 9 laps later lost the lead to sophomore driver Bertrand Baguette. All Baguette needed to pull off one of the most shocking Indy 500 victories of all time was a caution, but it never came, and with only 3 laps to go, the Belgian had to make a final stop for a splash of fuel. This meant that rookie driver J.R. Hildebrand, driving the car that Dan Wheldon had finished second with the previous year, was now the leader after passing defending champion Dario Franchitti for what was at the time second place. Hildebrand took the white flag in the lead and looked set for certain victory, until coming through turn 4 on the final lap as Hildebrand attempted to pass the slowing lap car of Charlie Kimball. Hildebrand's car pushed wide out of the groove and slammed the turn 4 wall. Hildebrand pinned the throttle wide open in an attempt to win the race with a damaged car, but second place Dan Wheldon came roaring by in the final stretch to take his second Indianapolis 500 win, and in the process becoming the only driver in history to win the race after leading only a single lap. The Bryan Herta Autosport team, which had barely qualified for the race in the previous year, had now scored the sport's biggest prize. A dejected J.R. Hildebrand still managed to finish second, and Graham Rahal took third. Tragically, Dan Wheldon would not get to defend his win in 2012, as he was killed in an accident in the season finale at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. For only the third time in the race's history, new rules for 2012 would require every single car entered in the race to be brand new. The added cost of the Dallara DW12 chassis meant that the race's entry was reduced significantly from 2011, from 42 entries down to just 33. There were some positives to be had from the new formula, as engine competition returned to the 500 for the first time since 2005, as Chevrolet and Lotus joined Honda in the field. However, the new V6 formula produced disappointing speed, some 6 miles per hour slower than the previous year in early practice sessions. New rules were hastily put in place exclusively for qualifying that would allow the engine manufacturers to turn up the turbocharger boost to try to achieve more competitive speeds. Despite the change, pole sitter Ryan Briscoe's Chevy-powered Dallara was still a full mile per hour slower than Alex Tagliani's pole position from the previous year. While the slowest car in the field, the Lotus-powered machine of Jean Alesi, was only able to achieve a 4-lap average of just over 210 miles an hour, becoming the slowest car to qualify for the Indianapolis 500 in over 16 years. When the green flag flew on race day, no one could have predicted just how different the style of racing would be from the previous year. Early in the race, Dario Franchitti was punted by E.J. Vizo in the pits, requiring a new front wing, while Mike Conway suffered his second airborne crash in just 2 years when he spun in turn 1 and was collected by Will Power. These accidents made Conway leave racing on oval tracks behind for good. Once again, it was the Target Chip Ganassi racing team of Dario Franchitti, who had recovered from his pit lane setback, and Scott Dixon, who were the dominant force, with Takuma Sato of Rahal Letterman Lanigan and Tony Kanaan of KV Racing posing the greatest threat to the Target dominance. As the race developed, an unprecedented style of Leapfrog Racing was created. The unique racing style was the result of a huge draft created by the new for 2012 rear bumper guards. As a result, the all-time lead change record, which had held since 1960 of 29, was smashed. By the end of the race, the lead would have officially changed 34 times. Kanaan used this style to great effect to challenge Franchitti for the lead late in the race. But just as he got there, Marco Andretti smacked the wall in turn 1, bringing out the caution. And on the restart, Kanaan was a sitting duck as Franchitti, Dixon, and Sato all got around him. With 2 laps to go, Franchitti made an aggressive pass on his teammate Dixon, and Sato followed him through. As the white flag flew, it appeared Sato was in the catbird seat for victory. He dove to the inside of Franchitti in turn 1 and lost control, slamming the wall. Franchitti missed the spinning Sato by inches and crossed the line to win his 3rd Indianapolis 500. Dixon was second, and Kanaan, who had yet to win the race, a painstaking 3rd. Rubens Barrichello, in his only Indianapolis 500 start, took the coveted Rookie of the Year honors with an 11th place finish. History will remember the 2013 Indianapolis 500 as a record-shattering race. A total of 34 entries answered the call at the start of May, but one of the biggest stories early in the month was a driver who was not entered, as 2004 NASCAR champion Kurt Busch took and passed his rookie test in an Andretti Autosport car with the intention of entering the 2014 Indy 500. Also setting headlines was Ed Carpenter, an Indiana native who whipped the local crowd into a frenzy, taking the pole position at over 228 miles an hour. Rookie sensation Carlos Munoz and Marco Andretti completed the front row, while Michel Jourdain Jr. was the only driver to miss the race. Unseasonably cool conditions greeted the 33 starters on race day, which increased the track's grip and intensified the Leapfrog Racing effect from the previous year, setting the stage for one of the most competitive 500s in history. By the race's end, 14 of the 33 starters would have led a lap, and the previous year's record of 34 lead changes would be absolutely obliterated, as the lead would change a stunning 68 times over the 200 laps. Tony Kanaan established himself as one of the strongest contenders for victory early on, but by the midway point in the race, a newcomer for Team Penske's IndyCar program, AJ Allmendinger, drove into the lead with authority. However, Allmendinger's chances of becoming an Indy 500 winner for the captain Roger Penske evaporated when his seatbelts came loose and forced him to make an unscheduled green flag pit stop. The race then turned into a duel between Tony Kanaan and Ryan Hunter-Reay in the late stages. But with just 7 laps to go, Hunter-Reay took back the lead from Kanaan, but suddenly, Graham Rahal spun coming out of turn 2, bringing out the yellow for just the 4th time that day. Officials quickly cleaned up the accident, and the race was set for a shootout in the final 3 laps. Much like 2012, the leader was a sitting duck on the restart. This time, it was Hunter-Reay who would suffer as he was split by Kanaan and Munoz into turn 1. Kanaan coming out the other side with the lead, and another yellow. This time, it was defending winner Dario Franchitti hitting the wall on the exit of turn 1. Sadly, this would be the last time Franchitti would turn a lap in the 500, as he would suffer a career-ending injury at Houston later in the season. The race would end under the caution flag. Luck had finally shown on Tony Kanaan as he would cross the line, take the checkered flag, and enter immortality. Kanaan's win is remembered fondly by many of the fans as one of the most emotional victories in Indy 500 history. Despite the race ending under yellow, it still broke a 24-year-long speed record previously held by Arie Luyendyk, with Kanaan setting a new 500-mile race record speed at over 187 miles per hour. The winds of change swept through the Brickyard for 2014. In an attempt to up the meager attendance at non-race day events, IndyCar created the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, which meant that IndyCars would not only race twice in Indianapolis, but they would race on the road course, an unprecedented move. Despite an embarrassing crash triggered by pole sitter Sebastian Saavedra stalling during the standing start, the inaugural event was deemed to be a success and continues to this day. The race was won by Simon Pagenaud for Sam Schmidt Motorsports. The 2014 Indianapolis 500 also marked the final time that Jim Nabors would sing the fabled Back Home Again in Indiana during the pre-race ceremonies. The 500-mile race yet again only saw an entry of 33 cars, but returning winners Juan Pablo Montoya for Team Penske and Jacques Villeneuve for Sam Schmidt, as well as former NASCAR champ Kurt Busch, added to the pre-race intrigue. Ed Carpenter once again wowed the Indiana crowd, taking his second pole position in a row, this time at a speed average of over 231 miles per hour. James Hinchcliffe of Andretti Autosport and Will Power of Team Penske completed the front row. On the Monday before the race, Kurt Busch got a taste of the Indy wall and would have to start the race in a backup car. The race began with Ed Carpenter and James Hinchcliffe trading places up front, with Marco Andretti moving into contention early on. As the race developed, other contenders emerged in the lead group, including Helio Castroneves, Townsend Bell, and from 19th place on the grid, Ryan Hunter-Reay. When Charlie Kimball spun and the yellow flag flew for the first time in the race, it brought an end to the longest green flag stint in Indy 500 history at 149 laps from the green flag, a remarkable figure in the modern era. The action was hot and heavy in the final 50 laps as Scott Dixon slammed the turn 4 wall, and on the subsequent restart, the front row starters of Ed Carpenter and James Hinchcliffe tangled in turn 1, eliminating both drivers. The green was thrown once again with only 20 laps remaining, Hunter-Reay leading, but Helio Castroneves in hot pursuit, still looking for his record-tying 4th Indy win. Another accident with 9 laps to go, this time Townsend Bell. The heavy amount of debris and safer barrier damage, as well as fans' displeasure over the previous 4 Indianapolis 500s ending under the yellow flag, caused officials to make an unprecedented decision to red flag the race in an attempt to manufacture a green flag finish. The decision proved wise, as Hunter-Reay and Castroneves put on one of the race's great duels over the final 6 laps of the race. The highlight being an incredible pass Hunter-Reay put on Castroneves going into turn 3 with 4 laps to go, nearly going into the grass. Hunter-Reay would hang on to the lead on the final lap, beating Castroneves to the line in the second closest finish in Indianapolis 500 history, and becoming the first American-born driver to win the 500 since 2006. Castroneves would have to settle for a painstaking second in pursuit of history. Marco Andretti completed the top 3. Rookie of the Year honors went to Kurt Busch, who put together a quiet but impressive 6th place finish in his first IndyCar start. Speed was the name of the game when the teams returned for the 2015 Indianapolis 500. New manufacturer-designed aero kits from Chevrolet and Honda looked to erase the track record of over 236 miles per hour set by Arie Luyendyk in 1996. Speeds gradually built up in the beginning of practice to around 230 miles per hour, far short of the record. But the real story in the month was quickly shifted from speed to danger, as several spectacular accidents during practice stole the headlines. On Wednesday, Helio Castroneves backflipped his Chevrolet between turns 1 and 2 and escaped injury. The next day, Joseph Newgarden suffered a similar airborne accident in the same spot, and he too walked away. Yet another accident happened in the warm-up session before Sunday qualifying, this time involving Ed Carpenter. In light of these accidents, series officials hurriedly postponed qualifying and pressed stopgap rules into service, forcing the teams to use race day setups, as well as eliminating the extra qualifying turbocharger boost. Scott Dixon took the pole at 226 miles an hour, with Will Power and Simon Pagenaud of Team Penske completing the front row. The odd man out of the 34-car entry was 1996 winner Buddy Lazier, who was unable to find the speed necessary with limited practice time. In spite of the lower speeds, the worst accident of the month happened during the Monday practice session when a suspension failure shot James Hinchcliffe directly into the wall. Hinchcliffe suffered major injuries when he was impaled by a suspension piece that penetrated the cockpit on impact. Miraculously, despite the loss of blood, the IndyCar safety team managed to stabilize Hinchcliffe at the scene, almost certainly saving his life. Ryan Briscoe would take over the duties at Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports for the 500 and start at the back of the field. The race began with a lot of apprehension about potentially serious airborne accidents, and it wasn't a good omen in Turn 1, Lap 1 when Takuma Sato and Sage Karam crashed. Under the yellow, Simona Di Silvestro hit the back of Juan Pablo Montoya, and the 2000 Indy winner now had to pit for repairs and restart at the back of the field. Throughout the race, Montoya picked his way back through the field, eventually taking the lead away from Scott Dixon on lap 165. The fears of airborne crashes on race day were thankfully unfounded, with the most serious accident being a multi-car pileup late in the race involving Jack Hawksworth, Sebastian Saavedra, and Stefano Coletti. The race developed into a duel between Scott Dixon, Will Power, and Juan Pablo Montoya in the final laps. Dixon was shuffled out by Power and Montoya, and it became a battle between the two drivers for Team Penske. Montoya put a final daring pass on Power on the outside of Turn 1 and went on to win his second Indianapolis 500. It was the first time in over 5 years that a Penske driver had found victory lane at Indianapolis. Power's second place meant it was Penske's first 1-2 finish since 2003, and Charlie Kimball took a surprise third place. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway opened to more fanfare than usual in 2016, as this would mark the 100th running of the greatest spectacle in racing. Improvements were made to the cars to prevent some of the previous year's acrobatics. The most notable change were NASCAR-style flaps on the rear of the cars that would deploy when the cars would spin backwards. Rookie Spencer Pigot was the first to test these new improvements, and they passed the test. His car stayed on the ground. Only 33 cars were entered for the 100th running, but there was no lack of drama in qualifying, as James Hinchcliffe's emotional return to Indianapolis resulted in a pole position at over 230 miles an hour. Joseph Newgarden and Ryan Hunter-Reay completed the front row. A sold-out crowd of over 350,000 people watched as Ryan Hunter-Reay established himself as the man to beat, leading 52 of the first 112 laps. but his hopes of a second victory were dashed when Helio Castroneves and Townsend Bell made contact exiting the pits, collecting Ryan Hunter-Reay and eliminating both him and Bell from contention. During this sequence, rookie Alexander Rossi cycled to the front on an alternate pit strategy, and in the middle of the next pit sequence, Buddy Lazier lost a wheel, causing a yellow, and just after another caution, caused by Takuma Sato smacking the turn 4 wall, turned the race upside down. These ill-timed yellow flag periods meant that most teams would have to make a final pit stop for fuel in the last few laps of the race. The battle for the win looked like it would come down to Joseph Newgarden and Carlos Munoz, both having to stop for that last splash of fuel. No problem, right? Wrong. Alexander Rossi, under the guidance of team owner Brian Herta, had saved fuel the entire final stint of the race and clutch and coasted his way to one of the most unlikely Indianapolis 500 victories in history. Rossi became the first rookie to win the 500 since 2001, and Brian Herta scored his second victory as a team owner and the second under incredibly unlikely circumstances. Carlos Munoz missed out on the Indianapolis 500 by only 4 seconds at the finish. Joseph Newgarden took third. After the hype of the 100th running, there was some discussion that the 101st would be somewhat of a letdown. That was until less than a month before the track opened for practice. Current McLaren Formula One driver Fernando Alonso broke the internet and announced that he would skip F1's most prestigious race, the Monaco Grand Prix, and trade his woefully uncompetitive McLaren Honda for a seat at Andretti Autosport for the month of May. The partnership also meant for the first time since 1982, McLaren would have a presence at the Speedway. These factors meant for the first time in 2 decades, the Indianapolis 500 had regained its international prestige. Once again, only 33 cars were entered, but once again, qualifying was full of dramatic moments. Sébastien Bourdais for Dale Coyne Racing had the fastest car in the field, setting laps at over 233 miles per hour in practice, but his hopes of an Indy 500 win were dashed when on a qualifying run of over 231, he suffered a horrific accident. While Bourdais would fully recover by season's end, his injuries would sideline him for the race. Scott Dixon took pole position with the fastest average speed in over 20 years at 232 miles an hour, only to be robbed later that night in a Taco Bell drive-thru. No, I'm not joking. While media darling Alonso would qualify 5th, Ed Carpenter and defending winner Alexander Rossi would complete the front row. The race got underway and picked up much in the same place it left off the year before, with Alexander Rossi taking command. But by lap 38, it was Fernando Alonso taking over the race lead. Could the two-time world champion score in his first Indy 500 start? Lap 50 saw one of the most frightening crashes in the history of the race as Jay Howard smacked the wall coming out of turn 1. With nowhere to go, pole sitter Scott Dixon launched over the top of Howard's car and into the inside catch fence, slicing the car in two and bringing out a rare red flag. Remarkably, Dixon emerged from the dismembered tub unscathed, and perhaps even more incredible was the escape of Helio Castroneves, who literally drove underneath the flying New Zealander's car, only losing a rear winglet in the process. When the race restarted, it was clear the winner would be driving an Andretti Autosport Honda, as they were the dominant force, but would it be Rossi, Alonso, or Ryan Hunter-Reay? The turn of speed came with a cost, and one by one, Honda engines began to expire. First Hunter-Reay, then Charlie Kimball, and finally, in a cruel twist of fate, Fernando Alonso's engine expired as well. The rash of engine explosions meant that an unlikely quartet of drivers would fight for victory. Castroneves, rookie Ed Jones, Takuma Sato, and leading with 10 laps to go, Max Chilton. With only 9 laps left, Castroneves passed Sato, and then with 7 to go, passed Chilton for the race lead. It looked like Helio was on his way to a certain 4th victory. With only 5 laps left, it was Sato, this time passing on the outside of turn 1 to take the lead, and it would remain that way for the final laps, as Sato would stave off the challenge of Castroneves and become the first Japanese driver to win the Indianapolis 500. Sato had achieved redemption for the mistake that cost him the sport's biggest prize in 2012. Ed Jones for Dale Coyne Racing scored an impressive 3rd. Despite this, Rookie of the Year honors were awarded to Fernando Alonso. IndyCar went back to the future in 2018 as the Chevy and Honda developed body kits were dumped in favor of a spec, but sexy, universal aero kit. Fernando Alonso would not return as his McLaren F1 team had split with Honda in order to acquire a more competitive Renault engine. This meant the media spotlight now shone directly on Danica Patrick, who was returning to Indianapolis for the first time since 2011 to do a final retirement race for Ed Carpenter Racing. For the first time in several years, qualifications would become truly important again, as 35 cars arrived to challenge for the 33 spots. Ed Carpenter managed to score his third pole position at over 229 miles an hour, but it was bump day that had everyone talking. James Hinchcliffe, who just 2 years earlier had been the Cinderella pole sitter, failed to find enough speed to bump his way into the field. Unlike Hunter-Reay and Andretti in 2011, Hinchcliffe and Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports would not buy their way into the field, and the popular Canadian was on the sidelines on Memorial Day weekend. From the drop of the green, it was Ed Carpenter establishing dominance. Defending champion Takuma Sato was eliminated early after tangling with the lap car of James Davison, as was Danica Patrick, whose career came to an end after spinning into the Turn 2 wall. Tony Kanaan, who is now driving for the legendary AJ Foyt, looked like a real contender for his second Indianapolis victory, only to be eliminated by a flat tire at the midway point. After a poor qualifying effort of only 32nd place, Alexander Rossi provided some fireworks with some incredible restart moves. Unseasonably hot conditions paired with low downforce meant that passing was at a premium this day. As the race entered its closing stages, it was Will Power who established himself as the dominant force in the race. But like many races in this decade, the 2018 Indy 500 would be a fuel mileage race, with Tony Kanaan spinning out of Turn 2 and bringing out the race's final yellow. The lottery appeared to have landed on Oriol Servia, who led the field to green on the final restart, but sweeping around the outside and into the lead was Stefan Wilson. Wilson was unable to get another yellow to make the distance and was forced to pit with 5 laps to go, handing the lead and the win back to Power. After 10 years of driving for Roger Penske, the Australian driver finally got his face on the Borg-Warner Trophy. Pole sitter Ed Carpenter was second, Scott Dixon was third, and Canadian driver Robert Wickens won Rookie of the Year honors with a 9th place finish. This event would mark the final Indianapolis 500 broadcast by Disney's ABC network. From 2019 and beyond, the race would be carried by NBC. In some ways, the entire decade felt like it was building to the 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. A stout 36-car entry list which featured 7 former winners, along with the return of 2-time world champion Fernando Alonso, who is now 2/3 of the way to becoming only the second driver behind Graham Hill to complete auto racing's Triple Crown, after scoring a victory in the previous year's 24 Hours of Le Mans for Toyota. This year, Alonso arrived with a factory effort from McLaren, supported by Chevrolet and Carlin Racing. When the dust settled in qualifications, it was Team Penske's Simon Pagenaud sitting on the pole position at over 229 miles an hour. But as so often the case at Indianapolis, it was bump day that stole the headlines. Having crashed on Wednesday and adding insult to injury by having the spare car sitting 30 minutes away from the track at a paint shop, Fernando Alonso was struggling and well behind the 8 ball. Despite a valiant effort, he and the McLaren team were bumped from the starting lineup from the upstart Hunter-Reay Racing and driver Kyle Kaiser. To add the icing on the cake, Kaiser's team had been faced with a similar situation to the Big Bucks McLaren team, with Kaiser riding off the team's brand new car just 1 day before qualifications began. But in less than 24 hours, Hunter-Reay had their backup prepared and on the racetrack. Not only was this one of the great stories of the decade, it's one of the race's great stories, period. Simon Pagenaud took the lead from pole and ran away from the field, putting a beat down rarely seen in the modern era, leading over half of the race. Kyle Kaiser's Indy dreams unfortunately ended against the Turn 4 wall on lap 74, while a fiery Alexander Rossi emerged as contender for victory as his Honda engine was slightly more fuel efficient than the Chevrolet, powering Pagenaud's dominance. The no conservation Rossi caught and passed Pagenaud on the 177th lap, but just as soon as it happened, Graham Rahal and Sebastian Bourdais triggered a huge pileup, bringing an unprecedented third red flag period for the decade. This stoppage eliminated the fuel mileage lottery, and the race became a straight-up duel to the finish between Rossi and Pagenaud. Pagenaud taking the lead back from Rossi on the restart, but with only 3 laps to go, Rossi made his move and passed Pagenaud on the outside of turn 1. With only 2 laps left, Pagenaud returned the favor on Rossi into turn 3. Rossi would catch Pagenaud in the same place on the final lap and move to the outside, but the French driver held strong on the inside and powered away from Rossi to take his maiden Indianapolis 500 victory. Pagenaud not only scored Roger Penske's 18th victory at the 500, but the first for a French-born driver since Gaston Chevrolet, one of the namesakes of Pagenaud's engine, did it in 1920. To speak to the competitiveness of the decade, Pagenaud also became the only driver to win the 500 after starting on the pole position in the 2010s. Alexander Rossi was just 1 lap away from his second Indianapolis 500 win, and after crashing out in the previous year's race through no fault of his own, 2017 winner Takuma Sato brought home a strong 3rd place. Santino Ferrucci of Dale Coyne Racing was awarded top rookie honors. The 2010s were a decade of stability IndyCar racing desperately needed following a 15-year civil war between CART and the Indy Racing League. With the turn of the decade to the 2020s, a mixture of uncertainty and yet optimism faces the great speedway. In November of 2019, it was announced that team owner Roger Penske would be purchasing both the IndyCar Series and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway from the Holman George family, which had owned the speedway since 1945. For many, this meant the new decade began with a fresh breath of air. But with the global crisis we can't name on YouTube causing the Indianapolis 500 for the first time in history to be scheduled in August, a shadow of uncertainty looms. Can the most successful team owner in the race's history continue the upward momentum of the previous decade in the face of unprecedented global turmoil? That remains to be seen. For now, let's take an opportunity and appreciate what we had and hope that the 2020s will produce an even more exciting and prosperous 500. So thanks everybody who watched to this point. I really appreciate it. These historical videos, while many people have asked for them, are a bit of a risk because they do take a lot longer to make. But I will say this, it's been so therapeutic and so much fun to make this video. It's given me quite a distraction as we kind of deal with this turmoil going on in the world. And I would like to thank, as you're seeing on the screen right now, all the Patreon supporters who have given my life a lot of stability and freedom to be able to take more time, write a script, edit this video to be the best that it could possibly be. I know it's not the content that you guys signed up for originally. Obviously, that can't take place until real racing comes back. So I hope this content is worthy of your support because it's very important for that support to continue. And if you did enjoy this content, there's more coming. So maybe go check out Patreon if you'd like to see your name on the next historical video, which I will be producing soon. I've got an idea. It's not actually Indy 500 related, so it's going to be kind of a departure from the regular content, but I think it's an interesting enough story that hasn't really been told that I'm interested in telling, and it involves Bernie Ecclestone. I'll just say that. So thank you guys all so much for watching. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more auto racing content. Thank you for watching and supporting for sure, because again, it means so much to me in these uncertain times. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. David Land, out.